In this in this part, we'll elaborate on the previous topics. The first part, which I would like to begin with, the content of the poetry. Content comprises theme, subject, message. The first response as a reader of the poetry would be generally an answer to a question. What is theme of the poem? A poem, like other art form, is an expression of the experience of the viewer. The poet persona may depict an object or record his impression, feeling, or emotions aroused by the object. For example, when William Wordsworth entered into a garden and suddenly he came across beautiful flowers, and the flowers were daffodil. The daffodil attracted his attention and suddenly filled his heart with emotions, and those emotions were created by that object. If there is a description or narration of that object in that poem, Daffodil, Wordsworth describes the flowers. The poem tends to be objective, but there is a narration or expression of the speaker's relation with the object. The poem tends to be subjective. Daffodil poem, to some extent, it is an objective poem as well as it is a subjective poem. A poem would be about any object under the sun, about the people and the places, about the incidents and happenings around them, either current or distant in time. A poem may carry a message, whether a poet overtly intends it or not. There is a message in the poem. In every poem, we have to draw out that message. Moreover, the theme, subject of the poem may also include biographical, historical, cultural, social, and or political references related to the object of the poem. Although critics do not encourage strong insistence in the contemporary times on these elements of the poem, these aspects assist a reader to understand poetry well. The second part of the content is biography. Whenever we appreciate or negotiate with a poem, we have to take into consideration the biography of that particular poet. Biography gives us the glimpses of the poet's background, in which background he develops, he was born, he was bred, and becomes matured as an artist. So that biography is very important factor to understanding or comprehending the poem. A poet is influenced by his surroundings and footings. Knowledge of the incidents, events in the life of a poet helps us, aids us as readers in a good reception of it. So, biography is very important, very significant for the comprehension of the poem. The last part of the content is the context. There can be no text without context. So, out of the context, the text is formed. The term context includes historical, political, geographical, and etymological references that are found in a poem. A good poem has multiple levels of the meaning. The study of the contextual references of a poem helps us in many ways to enjoy and understand a poem. For example, John Milton's Areopagitica, that is the work he created, gives us the understanding of his background as an artist, as a political leader. So with this, the first part of the element of the poetry, that is content, comes to an end. Second part of the element of the poetry is a form. It comprises the types of poetry. Poetry can be divided into two broad categories. That is lyrical and descriptive or narrative poetry. The poem that expresses heartfelt emotions and feelings of a speaker about any object, usually in the first person, are considered lyrical. Odes, sonnets, elegy are examples of lyric poetry. Lyric poetry is comparatively very small poetry. The descriptive narrative type of poetry uses a third person narration of the object. Ballad and epic are the examples of the descriptive narrative types of the poetry. When we compare these two forms of the poetry, that is lyrical one and descriptive one, so the length matters more. From this we have to go to the kinds of the poetry. Various kinds of poetry are results of the subject matter, form, and its treatment. First kind of the poem is ode. Ode is a type of lyric poem of moderate length. Basically, it is in the form of an address, appeal to an object, or a state of mind. Let me give a very simple example of that type. In a Ode on Glacier, John Keats begins his poem by the line that is, "Thou still unravished, bride of quietness." Poet addresses the object, that is earth, a pot, a earthen pot. Thou still unravished. Unravished means unaffected by the time. Unravished bride of quietness. You are still like a bride. So that is an address to inanimate, that is object. So ode is in the form of an apostrophe, address. The subject matter is very serious one. The object addressed is deliberately glorified at the same time. It is written in an elevated style and in an elaborate stanza pattern. The second kind of poem will study with the elegy. It is a lyric poem that expresses grief over the dead ones. Pastoral elegy mourns the death of someone very close to the heart, assuming him and the poet to be Shiva. There is an elaborate description of natural scene, assuming that nature is also participating in the mourning of the dead. The third kind of the poem is a sonnet. Sonnet is a 14-line lyrical poem. There are two basic types of sonnet. The sonnet which comes from the Italy, that is known as the Petrarchan sonnet, and sonnet of the Elizabethan period, that is from Shakespeare, named after the famous poet Shakespearean sonnet. So named after these poets, that Petrarchan sonnet, an Italian Renaissance writer, and then the Shakespearean sonnet from the Elizabethan period. These two sonnets are differ from each other by the stanza form which they used. For example, Petrarchan used 8 lines of first stanza, that is octave, and the 6 lines of the next stanza, that is sestet. Octave and sestet, that was the stanza form which is used by the Petrarch. The Shakespearean sonnet uses the quatrain form. He uses the 3 quatrains, 4 lines of each, and a couplet, and that is concluding couplet at the end of the poem. That concluding couplet is very intellectual one. It concludes or it summarizes the earlier one. The sonnet of Petrarch tends to split the idea into the two components, argument and conclusion, developed into the octave and sestet. The Shakespearean sonnet develops an argument in quatrain and offer a concluding overview in the final. The next kind of the poem is a ballad. It is a narrative poem about some incident and happenings in the life of a society, community, or a person. It is a major form of folk literature. It has a musical rhythm and is intended to be sung. Usually, a ballad is structured into quatrains with an uncomplicated framework of the rhythm. The last part, the last kind, is epic poem. It is a longer narrative poem. The catchword for an epic is grand. It should be in a grand style. The subject and its treatment are on a grand scale. The narrative, the deeds of a legendary or a historical hero in an elaborately elevated style. It follows many conventions and is an important form of a classical. Let me give a very apt example of the epic is Paradise Lost by the John Milton. Paradise Lost, written by the great poet John Milton, is to vindicate the ways of God to the man. So that was the theme of the poem. So with this, we comes to an end with the kinds of the poetry, and in the next part, we will deal with the meaning of the